Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspective podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we are going to have a conversation that I guarantee will change the way that we all look at success in our business. And we have on today a special guest, Courtny Cloeter. Now, Courtny, you've been a chief revenue officer multiple times at large organizations, and you've got a very specific and defined point of view on how we create value for our clients. How do we win? And actually, how do we increase our win rate? You've done this many times, going from like 25 to 56% win rates. That's amazing change. That takes more than a mindset. That takes a lot. And we're going to get into that and peel that onion back. But I just found that it's amazing. You actually married the girl next door.
That's great. Yeah, I did. Right next door.
It has lasted 33 years, so I guess it's on solid ground, right?
Yes. I made the right choice.
Here's what I'd love to do. Maybe you could just explain a little bit more about your background, and then we'll dig right in.
Great. And Steve, thanks very much for having me on today. As you mentioned, I've been a CRO many times. Grew up through the last 20 years, the whole HCM movement as it's gone from on-prem to more of SaaS in the whole cloud environment. Been through technology companies and worked with several large ones like a Ceridian, and which is now Dayforce, and also some smaller PE-backed private companies that are still in that SaaS space. But the common theme here, Steve, is really focused on growth, really focused on putting the key parts of the business together to get that accelerated growth and revenue that you just mentioned.
Well, let's start to dig into that. Here's the first thing that I'd love to do is you talk about the very first step is really reframing our own expectations of our own success. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of companies start off by saying, hey, we're growing 5, 10, 15%, whatever the number is. And they say, I want to be 25% growth. I hear that constantly. I want to be 25% growth. And they think about the rule of 40 and all these different things on valuation. My question automatically is, why only 25%? That, if you do this right, we can accelerate 30, 40, percent in revenue growth. But it takes some, strategy and takes some involvement by the board and the leadership team of the company. But we can really get there. So let's not focus and really box ourselves in only at 25%.
It's interesting because so many times in organizations, we're fighting, right? We're fighting to try to stay alive, especially in the startup realm, right? But if you put your focus on like kind of the big, hairy, audacious goals, right? Then you start thinking about how do you attain those. If you think about just maintaining, then you think about strategies to maintain. It really sets it into a whole different realm of expectations. So therefore, then what are the steps to get there? And that's where I wanted to, you talked about first, value is one of those questions or those terms that just is so overused in business, right? What does it even mean anymore? But you talk about understanding real value and defining what the real value is that you provide. What's the difference between value and real value in your mind?
Well, I think a lot of times companies go through an exercise to say, okay, what's our value proposition? What's our ideal customer profile? All the little acronyms that we all hear all the time. And then they say, okay, great. It becomes shelfware. We put it right over there. We've already done that exercise. They move on to the next one. I think a company that is constantly in touch with the customer, constantly hearing the feedback of what we're doing well, what we need to change, constantly is changing their value proposition. And when I say constantly, we're really building on what has been successful and the feedback we're being given on that. And those companies, again, that creates this shelfware and just forget about it and they'll look at it again 5 years later, they lose touch and they don't grow. And that's where you start getting into that, as we just spoke about, Steve, you're only growing at 15%. Well, is that good enough? Is it 25% good enough? Well, if you're constantly revisiting what value that you're bringing that customer, helping that customer meet their business goals and helping them accelerate their business, then you're going to be growing much quicker than you want to. So at the end of the day, value is it's a temporary thing that you have to continue to come back multiple times and check in to make sure that you're still on point with the customer.
I had a gentleman on the podcast, a 3-time B2B CMO, and he said, hey, One thing I've learned many times over is our ICP is complex and always changing, right? The market is always changing. Technology is always changing. AI is changing the world on us, right? If all that is changing and we're not asking the questions that you're saying we should be asking of ourselves, then we're missing out on opportunity, because within all of that change is somebody's going to figure out the right opportunities. And that's what I've taken away, right? Is like, don't stagnate, right? Take change, take opportunity, and see where you can define even greater and greater value and never be satisfied with the level of value that you currently are providing. Is that like a good takeaway from what you're saying?
No, Steve, that's a great question and a good summary. If you're not constantly rethinking your business model, constantly getting that feedback from the customer of what's going on, how you can help them change their business, and be nimble enough to be able to change that business model and continue to engage customer, you're going to miss revenue opportunities, and ultimately you're going to have other competition, nipping at you, taking away revenue you already have landed. So it's really that internal process where you continually challenge yourself. It's just not good enough. And unfortunately, some companies, they just get very, they go through the motions, they get very complacent, and they think about how they want to grow the revenue, but not and internally how they challenge themselves.
You know what's interesting? So, just as one factor, one slice of what you're saying here, I just read a stat. It was from a company. They put this out just over a year ago, like a year in February, that right now there is $3.7 trillion in customer revenue that's in play because of poor customer experience.
Yep.
$3.7 trillion, right? So with your model, I'd be thinking, how do I get more than my lion's share of that? That's an example, I think, of what you're saying is, look, if we look for the opportunities, it's there for the taking, right? Why 5%, 10%? Why shouldn't we be growing 40, 50%, right? So I love that thought process. And you had a test that you put onto ideas and you called it the so what test.
Yep.
I love the simplicity of your ideas here. Tell us a little bit about what test is.
Well, it's just really a litmus test that says, if we're going to do this, so what? If we didn't do it, if the customer didn't do it, would they lose revenue? Would they lose, their employees? Or would they be uncompetitive? And at the end of the day, the question is, so what? If you can't define what we're going to do, how it's going to change our customers' lives or our revenue streams, if you can't define this, then don't do it, because it's not a good idea. And, it's one of those things, you don't want to shoot down ideas, but at the same time, you can't chase everything. No company has unlimited resources. So at the end of the day, if they're going to do three things really well, you really have to define the so what. What's this really going to do?
So I have to ask you this because I'm buying into everything you're saying here. It makes perfect sense. Is there friction it creates internally that we need to be prepared for? Because if we're rethinking, right, we're rethinking lots of things. We're rethinking product strategies. We're thinking operational strategies. We're rethinking marketing, sales enablement, like everything in kind of the mode of what we're talking about here. How does that settle with the rest of the executive team or the teams that are in your own department? How does the philosophy really manifest itself internally when we've got lots of moving pieces and lots of high performance teams and people that are involved in this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the answer is obviously yes, it does cause friction. But I would challenge any company who has this cohesiveness and there's no friction in it, probably is not a growth organization.
Yeah.
You have to build a culture within that company, within that leadership team, to say that we embrace challenges, we embrace friction. And it has to be professional, it has to be constructive, and it has to be pointed towards the so what, why is this going to grow the company? But at the end of the day, there has to be that friction, because that's how you work things out. That's how you think about making this thing better. That's how you challenge yourself. And you're going to have it within your own teams, because there's only so many ideas that growth organization can do. And then when you bring it out, let's say we want to change a business model and how we go after it. Guess what? The operations team is going to say, no, we've already scaled this to this way. By changing this, we're going to lose productivity or whatever it may be. So you're going to have those internal conversations and really challenge each other that we got to figure out how to do this because it's the right thing for the business.
Yeah. And if it's the right thing for the business, that means it's the right thing for the customer too, right? And
Yep.
you mentioned earlier really understanding your customer. And I just want to ask a little bit more about that because I've talked to over 200 different C-suite executives on the podcast here, and I've asked them this question too, because in my experience and then experiences here interviewing folks, there tends to be a really high degree of familiarity with our customer, but not a lot of deep understanding with the customer. And to create real value means it's real value in their eyes,
Yeah.
right? There's never a lack of ideas inside of a company, product development ideas, all kinds of things, right? We're idea tanks, right? But it has to be anchored on the customer and value creation for them. So what's the role of the ideal customer in this win rate and growth performance value creation strategy of yours?
Yeah. And, part of that is that the organization you build has to be customer centric. It can't live in you can't build things in a vacuum or a closet. You really have to have the customer engaged on that. A lot of organizations, hey, we do an annual NPS thing. That's how we know how our customers are happy. Well, that the day after they give you the NPS, it's already stale.
Yeah.
You have to figure out ways, if it's advisory groups, if it's executive outreaches, executive programs, where you're constantly asking, how are we doing? But you have to go one layer below that and say, okay, what are we doing to help you become more competitive? What are we doing to help you, grow your business? Or what are we helping you do so that you don't have to shut down a factory? What is the role of our product, our offering to you that's helping you succeed in business? And I think that's the question behind the question, or the need behind the need, that we, as business people, we forget to do. We kind of do this as hey, I checked the box, I talked to the customer, they gave me this feedback, I sent it into the product development team, I've done my job.
Right.
As business has evolved over the last 10 years, you think about it, where we used to have everything was, based on that relationship with the account executive or the salesperson and that customer. And, they went out and saw each other all the time. They went and dinner, and there was a lot of really good, strong relationships. We don't have those today. Things have become virtual. Instead of having territory sales organizations, we have national sales organizations. We rely on, some really great tools that engage with customers and get feedback from customers. But that personal relationship just isn't there as much as it used to be. So, we almost have to really force ourselves, and it becomes a mandate by the company top down, that we're going to meet with these customers regularly. We're going to ask the question behind the question and really get that deep understanding of how we're adding value.
I love that because, we can use data as a proxy for really understanding the customer. And we got more data. We got data in the sales tech stack. We got data in the MarTech stack. We got data coming from product usage. We got data everywhere, right?
Yep.
And we can sit back and say, wow, I really know my customer. But what you're talking about is, please, if I'm not getting this right, let me know. But that doesn't replace actually having the conversations with the customers, the deep conversations that don't have the agenda of, I'm trying to sell you something, right? It has the agenda of, I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to give value, right? We're sharing value. Most executives don't have time to do that. Even chief marketing officers that have come onto the podcast, they say, hey, when we start out, we'll call up 15, 20 different customers and we'll have that deep, deep conversation. And then they stop, right? Because they don't have time. They're overloaded in what they're trying to do. And so then we lose that connection. And so what is the magic that comes out of those direct customer conversations that's so important?
I also just kind of frame this by, you'd mentioned about you've talked to people, they'll go do the interviews and then they don't follow up on it, or they don't, you got to build this into your DNA. And it's got to be an expectation top down that each of these executives that we're always constantly bringing these points of view back. And so once you build that in the DNA, it's like kind of working out. If you're an avid person that works out all the time, you feel bad when you miss a workout. And then the same thing happens where, you feel bad because you're not getting that feedback. So you build that in. But what the magic, to your question, the magic is really when you get the so what from the customer, and the customer says, yeah, let me tell you, you helped us do this, this, and this is why it's making our business more successful. You were able to help us. We had a corporate goal of improving our retention with our employees by this. You helped us implement a program that we've now tracked through, and we've been able to improve our employee retentions by 10% for the last 2 quarters. They're able to give you stats and everything that you're able to. So how many times do we as, sales and marketing people want some kind of quantitative number?
Oh, yeah.
That we can put out? Well, guess what? All you do is ask the customer that. What is the number you're measuring, and what's your goal in trying to achieve that? They will tell you because they want you to help them.
There was this woman, she came onto the podcast. She's a 3-time B2B CMO and a value accelerator advisor for Goldman Sachs. And she said the most powerful question, which is, you reminded me, if you just said the same thing in different words, she said, the most powerful question you can ask a customer is, in your own words, what is it we do for you?
Mm-hmm.
We're so convinced we know exactly what we do, right, for our customers.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that, right?
Yeah, but how many times you sit there and say, oh, we're going to get a video testimony. So we need a video testimony from this industry, from this level of person, so that we could, be able to use this on LinkedIn as a promotion, whatever. And at the end of the day, we get so focused on what we're trying to achieve. We're not listening to what the customer is asking. We're not asking the right questions.
Right.
So to me, it's much more pretty simple concept. Let's really just get with the customer, understand, and try to help us define what they're doing and quantify it. And then we can build all the videos or testimonies we want to help us. But it's really getting the feedback and the quantitative and the, what is this impact on your business? The so what again that's the information we need to get back. We need to get that back into the organization. Feedback's a gift. And the only way that we can do this is by getting that feedback back in the organization. So you have to have that mechanism built where you're constantly getting this data back into the business so we can adjust and make decisions.
You said something in there about we can't just have these conversations and then just keep it to ourselves, right? Yep. Who owns the voice of the customer, right? Who's in charge, or how do we aggregate all of this so that it is at the fingertips of all of us, right? That it's not knowledge that we really get and then, we retain, but if the organization doesn't understand all of this, then we can't really act on it. So who owns it, and how is it made available to the company?
I would almost go a step further, is like, what is considered voice of the customer? So many times you get on there, okay, we're going to do a VOC call to give everybody in the organization an update, and all it is stats, or maybe it's a quote, like, you do a good job. Yeah. So voice of the customer it's balanced, right? There's good things, there's bad things, it's quantitative, it's all that stuff. And once you frame it up and you tell the executive team and functional leaders, we're going to give this to you, and we got to take it to heart, and we got to own this. And I've seen it belong in customer success. I've seen it belong in marketing. I think we've kind of structured things in my organizations as the go-to-market team is really the growth team, and it touches all parts of growth. And I think customer feedback is something that's either shared by operations, product, and growth, or it sits in one of those departments. But at the end of the day, the idea here is that whoever owns it has to make sure they're going to say, okay, I'm open to feedback. I got to take this and I got to react. And I got to come back to the leadership team, the ELT, and say, here's what I've done with that feedback, and here's how I'm trying to make it, actionable.
You said something there called the growth team, and you have a real strong, opinion that the chief revenue officer, which you've been many times, isn't sales, right? Isn't just sales. It's everything that aligns behind the growth or the go-to-market strategy, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in charge in that kind of an environment, the voice of the customer, really, the buck stops with you then, doesn't it?
It does to an extent, but you got to have the partnership with your other ELT members, that runs operations as an example. If your COO isn't in line with you, or your CFO isn't in line with you, you either don't have the money or you can't pull it off, right? And you need that operations team. So again, I'm passionate about having that role. I'm passionate about taking action on it. Do I have to own it? No. Have I? Yeah. But at the end of the day, as long as we all agree that we're going to take that and really take action on it, that's the most important thing. But when you talk about the growth team, I don't think of it as sales and marketing and rev ops and customer success. It's really everybody on the same page going towards a common goal. And that's why we call it the growth team.
Yeah. So I guess maybe the better way to phrase that is, what is the role of leadership in this kind of value creation strategy? Because this isn't the kind of thing that happens naturally within an organization. So it's not naturally bubbling up. It's not naturally coming down. But does it take a leader like you as a CRO to come in and put a vision out for the company? Like, how does this become cultural, right? How does it become endemic within the company itself?
Right. It is top down driven. And a person like myself who comes in and reports to the CEO, obviously communicates with the board quite often. You can bring those point of views and stuff, but you really need you really need that CEO and board appreciation to say, yes, we want to hear this. We want to take action on it and so forth. So at the end of the day, it's top down driven. Everybody's got to be on the same page on it. I can do it on my team. I can implement it. I can hire the leadership that underneath me that says, yes, I want to do this, but then it stops with me. So really, that COO, the CFO, the CEO, we all got to be on the same page that we want to take this and learn from it. So it's a cultural thing. And sometimes it comes naturally. Sometimes you find somebody that's like, oh yeah, we used to do this over at a different company and I really enjoyed it. We just haven't got around to doing it here yet. And that's fine. But, you have to start somewhere. And at the end of the day, if you want somebody to be the person that pin the rose on to do it, I'll start it. But everybody else has to get on board too.
You bring up another important thing, which is, it's like, oh, we haven't gotten around to doing it, right? That can't be the culture. If it's important to do, we have to get around to doing it.
Yep.
You talked about why internal challenges are sometimes the biggest blockers to growth. And what did you mean by that?
Well, everybody's so fixated on competition or they're fixated on changes in the marketplace. We see it right now with AI and what it's doing in certain industries. It's either enabling or it's challenging in certain industries, and how do you take advantage of that? But there has to be that healthy conflict that's in the organization. And everybody has to say, yes, we're willing to, we're going to go to bat against each other at times. We're going to explain our point of view. We're going to be professional at it. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to make a decision. It could be the CFO, it could be the CEO, that we're going to do something on this. And we all have to jump in and say, we're there now. And that does take work. And you're not going to get it all the time right off the bat. But I'd much rather have a culture where you challenge each other to get better than everybody's afraid to talk to each other. They're not on the same page. It's more of a we'll get to it at some day type of thing, as opposed to got 5 things we got to solve for today. Let's get those 5 and knock them out. And we all walk out of the room and run 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. In order to increase our win rates, rethink our value creation, what's the question I haven't asked? Like, what's important here that you want to make sure that we communicate that I just haven't asked, that we haven't discussed so far?
That's a very good. You usually don't get those type of questions. So the open-ended ones where but at the end of the day, it's like, how do you pick the people that are on the same mindset, that run 100 miles an hour, that are willing to take that feedback, that do not take the status quo as normal, but they're challenging each other and their teams and you constantly. And, that's the magic is, right? You got to get that team together and they have to be on the same page running 100 miles an hour. And in a lot of organizations, you're seeing that, you see the traditional silos between sales and marketing and so forth. It could be operations, it could be product, where they don't want to work together. They want to sit there and build their own little fiefdoms and say, that the business doesn't hit its goal, but marketing says, guess what? We were great. We hit all of our goals this year. That's not it. You have to be able to get those people that say, you know what, my goal is this, and it's the whole team's goal. And even though I probably statistically hit, the metrics say I hit my goals, you didn't. And so again, the question is, how do you get the talent like that? And how do you pick it? And, my answer is that there isn't a silver bullet here. You got to have a lot of conversations. And if somebody comes to me right away and starts talking about their stats and how they did this and that, they're not the team player. And you want somebody on that organization that has a good knowledge of what they're supposed to be doing. But at the end of the day, you need these qualities of being able to get people that will take challenges, these qualities of people who want to continually improve and continually grow and not accept the norm. That takes a special skill set to find those people, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to help you get 25, 30, 40% revenue growth.
Those are the people you've got to find and retain. That's a whole nother conversation, another podcast episode, right?
That's one of the biggest challenges today is you find these little, and I won't call them unicorns, but they're pretty damn close. You find them, you get them in house, and how do you retain them? How do you keep the best, keeping our best? Yeah. And it's a constant one. It's just actually being good partners with them and being courteous to each other. But how do you reward them? And like you said, it's a whole different podcast. But just because you land those people doesn't mean you keep them. And that's a big piece too, is keeping a team consistently.
Well, we'll schedule another conversation about company culture. How about that? Yeah. How important that is. I've got one last question. It's in the same ilk as the last one I asked. And that is that, we've talked about so much here, and our poor human brains, we can only remember 2 or 3 things at a time. If you were to articulate the one most important thing that you wanted the audience to take away from this podcast today, what would that one most important thing be?
I would have to say that we're right where we started this whole conversation, and that is that you can't accept that 15, 20% growth is where you want to be. If you really want to dominate a market, then take what you want, not what you can get. And, and that is easy to say and hard to do. And that's putting the right strategy in place. That's getting the right people like we just spoke about. That's getting the organization not to accept that just barely being 101% of our goals is us knocking it out of the ballpark. So there's a lot of things that have to happen in place to get there. But at the end of the day, the one thing I would say, Steve, is that don't accept that hitting your goal or 15% growth year over year is a good thing. Challenge it. Try to be that person that, hits 50%. Yeah. And if you ask yourself, what do we need to do? And then you got to be real honest with yourself and the organization. Will we do it? And if we do, then let's go. 150% is the new goal.
I love it. Set the sights high, right? I have a son that I probably need to have that same conversation with.
The analogy I always think about is, and somebody told me this once, and I wish I can remember who it was, a high jumper, when they're in practice, they don't jump at the height they've made. They jump at 2 to 3 inches higher. So if you're used to constantly hitting 6'6" as a high jumper, you don't jump at 6'6" in practice. You're jumping at 6'8", 6'9", 6'10", whatever the number may be. Because what happens is if you go to the meet, you get the adrenaline flowing, you hit 6'6", but you've never gone to 6'7" before, you have a mental block. So you have to say to yourself, I've been at practice jumping at 6'10" for the last year. It's just that, I've seen this height before. And that's, again, not accepting that, 15% growth is a good thing.
Well, here's what I know. There's going to be a lot of people that have questions. Would it be appropriate if I gave a link to maybe your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you and ask questions?
Happy to help. Happy to talk to anybody, Steve.
Well, fantastic. Here's what I'll say is that the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives from across the C-suite together that all help us grow. And if we can do that time and time again, that's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were a very important part of that rising tide today. I just wanted to say thank you for all your contributions.
No problem. Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity.